This is wonderful, but it's nap time, and I understand that. Remember the rule. If you have a question, you ask it. I've already explained to the Burnetts that we forget, and therefore, you ask the question when you want to. A matter of introduction. I'm often disappointed because I think we live in a world where courage is known by its absence rather than its presence. And maybe it's always been so. Today and tomorrow morning, we're going to hear a story that weaves very deeply into the concept of courage. Courage of people like you and me. Oh, we're going to talk about Niemöller and Bonhoeffer. But we're going to talk about folk like us who said, that's not the way it's supposed to be. And as confessing Christians, they planted their feet and they stood up tall and they paid a terrible price. But they stood up and stood tall. And this afternoon and tomorrow, we're going to hear the tale. We're going to hear the story. The Reverend Dr. Richard Burnett has come with us with Martha, and we've already gotten to know them, and it has been absolutely pleasant, as it will be for you. Remember now, questions when? You are so good. Dr. Burnett?
It's a delight to be with you all this afternoon, and this may be nap time for some of you, and if it is, that's fine, but I'll try to keep things going. It's an honor to be invited to do this, and Bob said one of the first questions people ask you about is who are you and who are your people, where are you from? And so we anticipated that, and I just wanted to say a little word. My wife, Martha, and I have been studying these things for most of our adult lives, and so it's going to be very difficult to say everything at once, and so some of this will move fast, but if you have questions, we'll try to answer them. But just a little bit about us. I wanted just to let you know about our origin story. Our fathers were born in September of 1924. My father was born on the 13th, her father on the 4th, and they ended up being on the opposite sides in the Second World War. My father was in the U.S. Army Air Corps bombers, and her father was in the Luftwaffe. And the guy with the swastika on his head is her father, not mine. Okay, just to let you know. And the interesting thing is that they both had experiences during the war, and they were felt called to be ministers, and they became ministers, and they ended up eventually baptizing our first son together. So you can be trying to kill each other one day and then share in the same grandchildren the next. And so this is something we continue to think about and are grateful for. We're grateful for those who did stand faithfully in a time of very dark period in the history of the world, and not least of all in the church. I'm here to talk primarily about the church, but I want to talk to you about the context. How does a society, how does a church capitulate and become seduced during difficult times? And it's a process, and I don't want to bore you, but there are all kinds of political and economic and sociological factors that I'm just going to run through just to let you get a sense of how did one of the most sophisticated, educated, talented societies ever in the history of the world become so quickly seduced by National Socialism. And how did that happen? Well, people just didn't get up one morning and say, I think I'd like to be a Nazi. That's not how it happened. There were a lot of factors involved, and the first thing and I won't give you a history lesson, but the German people did not really become a nation until 1870s. They didn't consolidate, so they're rather new in terms of their government. They didn't particularly care for democracy. They liked monarchy. They thought democracy had a way of defining deviancy down, as I think Patrick Moynihan used to say. So they didn't put a lot of trust in democracy. They thought it would lower standards eventually. So that's partly why the First World War was fought, because they wanted to preserve the monarchy. They wanted to preserve these standards that they thought were so important. And so after the First World War, the Allies, as you know, there was something called the Weimar Republic that was established. It's the first experiment that Germans had with democracy. It turned out to be a disaster, and in many different ways. But there was and I'm going to talk to you about this in more detail, but there was a suspicion about democracy. There was a suspicion about capitalism, suspicion about the radical individualism of the West. They feared what the West would do to their society, as much as they feared what the communists, the Bolsheviks, would do in the East. Hitler is a master of triangulation, and this is what I'm going to try to tell you about. When Hitler and the Nazis talked about the West, France, England, and America, they continued to use the words of decadence, permissiveness. They talked about the Roaring Twenties. They talked about flappers. They said, this is where this is going. Challenge the tradition, revolution in manners and morals. Okay, this is how they described the West. Karl Barth said, after the First World War, it seemed like no one wanted to do anything but dance in Europe, and that's what they did for a while. But there was, in the midst of all this, there are millions of wounded veterans in Germany and in other parts of Europe. The Treaty of Versailles is going to have all kinds of consequences in terms of, even Dietrich Bonhoeffer, others like that, will come into America and say how unjust it was. People like Lloyd George of England and Clemenceau of France, and even Woodrow Wilson, the French and the English wanted blood, and they got it. And it really set the reparations. There were all kinds of factors that just devastated the German economy. And there was hyperinflation. You've heard about these stories of people with the wheelbarrows to get a loaf of bread. I've got some show and tell up here. I got some currency, some stuff I can show you. The unemployment rate just plummeted. You've got all these wounded veterans that and unemployment, and of course the stock market crash in '29 is going to be a cataclysmic event. Here's a good portrayal by Otto Dix, is a post-war artist. And this was sort of his description of, I'm sorry, these folks, I don't know if you can see this. Can you see this? I'm sorry. Tell me to move. I want you to look at this picture. This is a wounded veteran. This guy showed me, your tech guy showed me there's a thing to point on this. Yeah, see this? There's a pointer. You see this guy? This is a wounded veteran of the First World War. He's got the uniform. And he's wondering, what did I fight for? Why did I give my limb or my life to this cause of the Weimar Republic, this decadent, permissive society that is, and you see sorry, clicker. You see the kind of attire that these ladies are wearing. You see, obviously, you've got the instrument of the devil, the saxophone there, a symbol of American jazz, which was also the symbol of decadence. And then you have, and there's sort of even though these people apparently are acting happy, there's death that surrounds them. And so this is Otto Dix is the artist, and wanting to portray the mentality of a lot of the German people during the Weimar Republic, and this is his expression of their sentiment. Hitler comes as like a Bismarck, who was the first monarch to be able to establish the German state, so he's portrayed as a savior. There is class. Of course, there's usually class battles. the Nazi Party is going to say, we're going to unite the classes. That says we remain comrades, and this is, of course, a professional person on the left versus a working class people. We're going to unite together against this sort of the Marxist Bolshevik vision of society. And then this, what they see in capitalism as being such a hierarchical class structure, they want to be in solidarity with one another. Hitler writes Mein Kampf. I don't know, how many of you have ever tried to read that? Yes, that's good. Okay. It makes for very interesting reading, and some of it's crazy, but some of it's more lucid than somewhat frightening to think how lucid and how much of a historical reflection he provided, perhaps more than any other American politician we could name today could not write such a volume in terms of just the scope of what he was trying to portray. But he did a lot of what he said. I'll give you some quotes from it. One of the things is one of the things, and this is too long a quote, except what Hitler rails against and what the Nazis were railing against was the radical individualism of the West. That's what they attack. He says, and this is in Mein Kampf. And by the way, everybody after he got elected was presented a copy of Mein Kampf. If you got married, you got a free gift of Mein Kampf from the government. He made a lot of money out of it. But it says, it is thus necessary that the individual should finally come to realize that his own pride is of no importance in comparison with the existence of his nation. That the position of the individual ego is conditioned solely by the interest of the nation as a whole. That pride and conceitedness, the feeling that the individual is superior, so far from being merely laughable, involve great dangers for the existence of the community that is a nation. That above all, the unity of a nation's spirit and will are worth far more than the freedom of the spirit and the will of an individual. And that the higher interest involved in the life of the whole must here set the limits and lay down the duties of interest of the individual. By this we understand only the individual's capacity to make sacrifices for the community, for his fellow men. So this is about, this is National Socialism, this is about our society, this is about building a community of people, and what we see in the West is tearing down community, and we need to fight against this radical individualism. Now that's on the West. They've got problems with the East. Here are some of the monarchs of the past. We won't get into that, but Hitler is just seen as as a succeeding leader of unifying Germany. He represents the Teutonic tradition, the great German Teutonic tradition of the warrior king, and he's going to defend the nation against all its enemies. Now, he's also the master of the photo op. Hitler was very, very clever. In terms, we'll talk about his interest in art and architecture, but he was also understood the value of symbols and what we call the photo op. And so he would often, like this picture coming out of a church with the crucifix superimposed over his head. No accident there. What would happen to manipulate the church, he would give gifts to buy stained glass or bells or something like that, and somehow it would just get leaked to the press that he was doing this. And there were stories told from pulpits that he had a devotional time every day, had a New Testament in his pocket and would read his devotions. None of that was true, but it was told. He was a pious Catholic boy, and that was the story. And of course, lots of pictures of him with friendly relationships to the church. He hates the church. I'm going to say more about this later, but he knows he has to deal with the church. Pious pose. Here's just part of the propaganda. It says, we hold fast to the Word of God, vote for the German National Party, the proto-Nazi party. There's going to be an effort to want to show the German nation we need to get back to our roots, and that includes part of our heritage, theological heritage. There's also a great deal of interest in building a new society. And so there's an enormous program that begins to raise up children. And there is going to be a program eventually called Lebensborn. Anybody heard of Lebensborn program? It was an effort to create more babies. And they did this with some well, they thought it was going to be quite successful. Ended up that after the war, they had all these babies and no one would take care of them except mostly the Roman Catholic Church. They would breed. They would breed SS officers with willing women to create, because they knew they were going to expand and they needed more Germans to do this. And so that was a very well established program that began. I guess what was the year that began? At least by the early 40s, more explicitly. But also wanting to stress family values. We've got to protect the family. We've got to strengthen the family. You know, to my ears, that's not all bad. But for what end, I guess, is the purpose, what the question we would want to raise. So lots of pictures of healthy families. We want to, Hitler makes all these promises to mothers. And he kept the promises in many ways. He would never send them into the factories. And that happened. And Hitler was very popular with most of the mothers of Germany, overwhelmingly. Even, well, at least until the 40s, when they started losing their children. Alfred Rosenberg, it was one of the racial theorists. Let me just, I'll try to summarize this very quickly. Nazism could not have had as much influence had it not been for the medical community. They were very influenced by eugenics. A lot of the research that they got for building this new race, this new people, they got from America. If you want to find out, there's a museum called Hartheim in Austria, and it's a museum regarding eugenics. And as some of you may know, the United States, the Carnegie Foundation, and Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all these folks, these institutions at the beginning of the 20th century were highly invested in eugenics. We pioneered so much of eugenics research, and that is building, so that led to castration, that led to all the kinds of things that the Nazis, that we say, well, that happened in Nazi Germany. Some of this was happening in the United States, and many of you perhaps know about that. But a lot of the research was about preserving and building a better society, and a society that was healthier. It was in the name of health. So you have euthanasia, you have all kinds of other things going on. But the issue has to do with something that it's going to come up in a theological context regarding, in the first article of the Barmen Declaration, about what is our standard, what's our authority. Some of the German theologians were thinking blood. There's power in the blood, we sing, right? There is power in the blood, but they were thinking that in terms of history, why is it that some of the greatest chemists, some of the greatest physicists, the greatest composers, Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, Haydn, just all the great, why is it that they're German? Why is it that the great modern philosophers, just name Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, why all German? Why is it? And they ask these questions. They're saying, well, the science is telling us it's in the blood. And if we are going to continue to keep giving the world such brilliance, such gifts to the world, then do we not owe it to the world? Do we not owe it to God to keep our blood pure? That's the pitch. If you think this is just about hate, why do they hate Jews? You're going to miss it. Because this isn't how they thought about it. They thought about love. we're going to build this society. And we want to bless the world through these gifts. You understand that, and then you'll understand the motivation of what some of these people were doing. Yes, well, they wanted to eliminate. They did eliminate, and that's a horrible thing. We'll talk about it, but you got to understand what's driving it in a positive way, for at least in their eyes. Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't entirely make sense. Of course, if you're a Christian, but now let's not take that for granted, Bob. Yeah. But this is Rosenberg. This is what Rosenberg is. He's part of one of these racial philosophers that is beginning to tell how important it is to certain ethnic cultures have their contributions, and we need to preserve these, and ours happens to be the one that thinks through things. And now, I think the Scots did pretty well, too. So it wasn't all Germans. So anyway, my wife, by the way, I should have mentioned this. My wife is a German citizen still. She's applied to be an American citizen. So, and she also grew up Lutheran. Okay. Now, we had a prenuptial agreement that resolved some of that. But so anyway, I'm convinced she's still a Lutheran when she dreams. But you know, we'll talk more about this sort of ethnic, this idea of it being in the blood and how that motivated these people. Again, these beautiful people, this is what the National Socialist government is trying to preserve, build. We want to build a good, healthy society. These strapping young men, we are going to create more and more. And then on the other side is, you've got this, this is the word for degenerate art. You've got this poison that they refer to it coming into our culture. And it's coming, yes, from the Jews, who happen to be overwhelmingly, in the eyes of many of them, to be Marxist, sympathetic to the Bolshevik Revolution. And this is what we have to eliminate. And of course, look again, so there's this idea that we need to go back to classical art, and this modern art, we need to really cleanse it from our society. And there it is. There's that saxophone again. Look at all the symbols there that going on. This is what we want to. What did that say? What did that say? No, let me this one. This says, okay, anybody can read that? Swing dancing is forbidden. No swing dancing. Swing dancing, okay? I'm not sure I know what swing dancing. Maybe you know what swing dancing is, but this was part of this. Again, the decadence of the West that they were trying to protect their children from. And then, of course, again, the problem increasingly after 29 with unemployment. Hitler becomes very popular, and he is celebrated again and again in the streets. And then they have what I would call, as some have called, sort of a 9/11 experience. This, Hitler is elected, he's elected democratically in 1933 in January. And a coalition government, there's all kinds of political intrigue, but the Hindenburg is able to is relinquish some of his power, and he becomes the leader. For that to happen, there had to be a crisis, and the crisis was the burning of the Reichstag, the government buildings in Berlin, in February the 1st of 1933, and this young man, Van der Lubbe is his name. He was a Dutch communist, and this young man was held responsible for having set I don't know if you've been to Berlin, and the Reichstag is still there, but these enormous government buildings, but they were burned. And historians have debated whether the Nazis burned them themselves, or whether this guy was a dupe and they just blamed it on him. It's interesting that this young man was, he was arrested, and some of you know about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. How many of you know about Bonhoeffer? Bonhoeffer his father was the greatest psychiatrist in Germany, and he was the director of the Charité Clinic in Berlin. But his father was the psychiatrist that examined this young man to see if he was psychologically competent to stand trial. And his father, he was competent. He was eventually executed. But what this happened was, this was like 9/11 in that it sent the whole country into a panic. And when they burned the Reichstag, everybody said, you know, and the Nazis, of course, blamed it on the communists. We have got to put this down, and we've got to have martial powers to be able to do it. And so that's how Hitler gains the kind of authority to be able to do what he did. Now, you can't read this, but I'll just tell you, this is propaganda against what's going on in Russia, in the Soviet Union. It talks about churches are being closed, thousands of priests are being murdered, religion is being blasphemed and mocked. So as I said, nobody just wanted to wake up and become a Nazi. The choice was, do you want to be like what's happening in the West with all the decadence and permissiveness and what's capitalism is doing to the society, or do you want to be like the atheist, barbarous Bolsheviks in the East, who are absolutely wiping out the church? They are killing thousands of priests, and they were shutting down churches. And so, can you imagine if you're a Christian? What's the choice? I mean, you certainly don't want your country. Most of the Christians didn't want to happen to Germany what was happening in the Soviet Union. And so so what's the choice? Oops. There are deals made. In 1933, there's something called the Concordat of 33 that the Nazi government understands that they need to make with the Roman Catholic Church. Let me see if that's Pacelli, Archbishop, and he's going to become Pope Pius XII. And there's going to be something called the Concordat of 1933. And that's going to be basically an effort for the church to say, you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone, or the Nazis say, you leave us alone and we'll leave you alone. And so the Roman Church does not officially do much in terms of protesting, in terms of publicly, officially, up until at least 37, 38, then they begin to make more noise. There's a lot of controversy about what this guy Pacelli, Pope Pius XII, knew, what he didn't know. We can get into that. But basically, this was an effort to try to silence the church, the criticism of the church. And Hitler hated the church. He despised it. But he knew he had to deal with it. And he thought these people are just interested in their own property and their pensions. And he said, I could tip it over quickly in a couple of days if I wanted to, but I don't want to, it's going to make me look bad. So what I need to do is get inside of it. And so there's a plan for him to get inside the church. And of course, they're celebrating, part of this is an effort to, again, to triangulate. Luther is celebrated as, again, a great German, and for what he did to establish German unity in the German language and to codify, or at least to make that more standard. And Luther is seen as a great national hero. You can see some of the art. Look, they're using Luther to their own ends. The communists did the same thing, by the way, with Luther. He was the man of the people, but they're trying to use. Yes, sir.
Is this campaign the church, the Catholic Church, the Lutheran Church, or the church combined?
Okay, there's two basic churches in Germany at this time: the Roman Catholic and the Evangelisch, the Protestant church. The Evangelisch, the Protestant church, is divided up into the Reformed and the Lutheran, or formerly Lutheran in this case. But the Lutheran and the Reformed, and the Reformed are not quite as large, but they have different districts. In different states. You've got about 11 different states at this time in Germany, and each of them have a bishop for the Lutherans. And so but what Hitler's going to do is this, and maybe this, and I don't know if this goes to what you're going after, but let me, I'll get to this, a little more detail about this. What the Nazis wanted to do is to promote something, and this was in their party platform, Article 24 in the Nazi Party platform ever since 1924. They were wanted to promote Christianity. They said they wanted to promote what they called positive Christianity. What's positive Christianity? Well, I'm glad you asked. So here it is. This is not 24. We demand the freedom of all religious confessions in the state insofar as they do not jeopardize the state's existence or conflict with the manners and moral sentiments of the German race. The party as such upholds the point of view of a positive Christianity without tying itself confessionally to any one confession. It combats the Jewish materialistic spirit at home and abroad and is convinced that a permanent recovery of our people can only be achieved from within on the basis of the common good before the individual good. Let me just say one thing. You could not be in the SS if you were an atheist. They did not allow atheists to be in the. They invented a new category besides the two I mentioned, but Roman Catholic and Protestant or Evangelisch, and that was a new category that they developed called Gottgläubiger. Gottgläubiger is just simply a believer in God. Now you could it could be any God you wanted. But you had to be a believer in God, a generic God, and that sort of like a deist, I guess. But you could not. They would not allow you to be in an atheist. And Hitler said, "I'm not going to allow atheists." We have his speeches in Stuttgart and other places. I'm not going to allow any atheist in my government. Hitler says this, and he wants them at least to be Gottgläubiger. Now, there's going to be a new group, and they're going to be a group that is rather, we call them, they become Nazified, a party within the church, and they call themselves the German Christians, the Deutsche Christen, and these are people who want to really see this melding of their own German ethnic and nation hood into the Christian faith, and they're saying, there was a time in which the church was Hellenized, and there was some good influences by what happened when the church in the early centuries had some influences from the Greeks. The Greeks could think about a thing or two, and when the church benefited somewhat from that. And then, the Germans did pretty well in the Reformation. They contributed to it. But, now we want to do that again. I mean, we want to make sure that a good, positive Christianity is being put forward to our people. But these people were the ones that became the very pro-Nazi party in the church, called the German Christians. You see, the word DC, Deutsche Christen is the name, and they have rallies. You see the flag, DC, Deutsche Christen, and these are going to be the ones who are going to try to push the agenda of the Nazi party within the church.
So do they separate, Richard, from the church, or does the church separate from them?
Well, Bob's question is, did they separate from the church, or did the church separate from them? That's a very complicated question, because what happens is they're going to force a vote, and they're going to try to get inside and control the church, the Deutsche Christen, but it's not going to work. It's not going to be as successful. And as soon as it doesn't work, the Nazi Party is going to drop them, and because they were no longer politically useful. But they're a way of intimidating the Christians, the confessing churches, but here's they were part of what was called the German Christian faith movement, and I don't want to go. I'm sure you all have more questions, so I won't go through all this. But it's all about. Again, look at number 4. We stand on the ground of positive Christianity. We confess an affirmative faith in Christ, one suited to a truly German Lutheran spirit and heroic piety. The Lutherans have, we've talked, some of you know about this two-kingdom doctrine that the Lutherans have, and they want people young men to sacrifice themselves. I've got a little New Testament up here that they gave to soldiers, and in the first page of that is Romans 13. You obey the authorities. And this is what they carried with them into battle. And what Jesus becomes for these people, this is what's interesting. Jesus is turned into a hero. He gave his life for his country. Go and do likewise. I won't get into all this. There's so much more I can talk about. The political stuff, they try. Here's what happens. It begins by introducing something called the Arian paragraph. The Arian paragraph happens in 1933 in April, and it says this. This was the first step of the government trying to really get their nose into it and impose it upon the church. And that is, that first article, only those persons may be called as clergy or officials in the general church administration who have the requisite educational training and enter into their office in unconditional support of the national state and the German Protestant church. Now here's the next line. Those of non-Aryan descent or married to non-Aryan descent may not be called as clergy or officials in the general church administrations. Clergy or officials who marry a person of non-Aryan descent are to be dismissed. Who counts as a person of non-Aryan descent is to be determined by the regulations accompanying the laws of the Reich. Okay, so this is the shot across the bow. Everybody knows, what does this have to do with the Bible? Who says you can't be, you have to be Aryan, even in Germany, to be a part of the church? Everybody knows, and the church should have known, that this is over the top. And so this is, as soon as this comes about, there's going to be a protest among what is going to become the confessing church. And Martin Niemöller some of you know the name Niemöller? Okay? Niemöller is a U-boat commander. He sank hundreds of thousands of tons of British Allied ships in the First World War as a U-boat commander. He becomes, after the war, he gets converted and becomes a Christian and decides to become a pastor. And you can't question his patriotism. Okay, he's a veteran, and everybody knows they don't question his German loyalty, but he sends out 4 points and to all the pastors, all the Protestant pastors in Germany. And it was called the Pastors Emergency League, and they 4 points where they reject this, and they said, we're going to stand in solidarity with others who are of non-Aryan descent. We're not going to let the state tell us what to do about this. We're going to stand by our guns, I shouldn't say that. We're going to stand by our convictions, our confessions, and this is not what our confessions teach, or it's not what the scriptures teach, and here I stand, we can do no other. This is what's going to come about. This is going to let everybody know that the state's coming after us, or the state is trying to control us. There's a vote. Now here's the thing, and Bob's question is very important. How did it happen? Hitler is very smart about this, and his people are smart. You can't just wipe the church out. You can't do it. You got to get inside of it. How do you get inside of it? Oh, we've got a plan. And you got all these bishops. All you Lutherans, you got 11 bishops around. We can't have all these bishops in our government. What we need is one, because let's just have why don't we just have you all vote for a national bishop? Because you all know how politics works. It's in the back smoke-filled rooms of government. We can't have all you people out here debating these things. We need to have one bishop, and so you all vote for a national bishop. Well, and Hitler had somebody in mind for that. A chaplain friend he had, Müller, in the First World War, who had been a friend of his, and he said, he's not that bright a bulb, and I can dupe him. He was not as malicious, but he was just not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And so he went along with that, and they had this vote to become we're going to have a national, whether we're going to have a national bishop or not. Well, the vote happened, but and this is the guy. This is this is Müller, Ludwig Müller in the middle. He's sort of a secular-looking bishop, and there he is shaking hands with Hitler there on the right, he's going to get the church in line. He's going to make them. He's going to get the church in. There's something called Gleichschaltung, and there's a need to get the whole society has been fragmented. And it's been what's happened during the Weimar Republic has just sort of destroyed us. We need to get things back in order. And there's a word that they all use called Gleichschaltung. It's getting in the same gear. We need to get in the same gear, and so. And that's what Muller's going to do for the church. He's going to help us get in proper order again. He is there. He is being appointed. It doesn't work out, and so you do have a split, and between the confessing churches and the German Christians. The German Christians actually are not that. They're not that many, but they're very vocal. Most of the people, like today, they're in the middle. Only a third. We're going to talk about the confessing church tomorrow, how that emerges. But I'm just setting you up sort of how it got to become how it became a crisis. Okay, so by the way, so one of the meetings, Hitler had some of the Protestant leaders into his office, and of course their phones had been tapped. And they had been talking to each other, and they had said things negatively about Himmler and other people in the government, and they had it recorded. And so Hitler had all these church officials, Protestant church officials, in his office, and Niemöller was one of them. And he told them basically, if you want to keep your property and your pensions, and you people want, then you need to just keep your mouth shut about what we're doing, and we'll leave you alone. And you take care of the people's souls. We'll take care of the people's the nation, and the people, and so he had them. But before that meeting before the meeting, Goering came in and had transcripts of some of the things that these pastors had said on the telephone, and he said, "Did you really say this? And that's disloyal. That's not they had something on these pastors, and it intimidated them, of course." But anyway, at the end of the meeting, when they all filed out and shaking his hands, and Niemöller said to Hitler face to face, he said, "Herr Kanzler," or Herr, I don't think he probably called him Führer, but he said, "You said that our responsibility is for the souls of the people, and you will take care of the people." And he said, "But God has given us a responsibility to take care of the people too, and we're going to keep our commitment," something to that effect. And Hitler never forgot that, and he hated Niemöller. And in 1937, he sent Niemöller to Dachau and was his personal prisoner. And in Albert Speer, that book Inside the Third Reich, he says that if the word Niemöller were mentioned in Hitler's presence, it would send him into a rage. So Niemöller got under his skin. But Niemöller continued to preach in his pulpit in Dahlem, which is a suburb of Berlin, and an enormous amount of people were blessed by that ministry, even after Niemöller was taken out, but Bonhoeffer among them. Okay. Let me just, there's an effort to silence the church. It's called the Muzzling Act. They tried to make them, I won't go into this. I want to leave some time for, I thought there were going to be more questions, but I want to leave time for more questions. I'm talking too fast. Okay. Okay. All right. I will. Let me just say a little bit about this. The whole thing is built on emotion. Anybody know where this is? This is in Nuremberg. This is where you can go there to this day, where these massive rallies would take place. You can go there to this day and see this, and it's incredibly impressive because they would have these things. It was they would have these rallies, and they would have these rallies, youth rallies, and they would have young people from all over Germany to come, and they would have powerful music, Wagner. You would have this people moved emotionally, and then they would have it. Let's see. Wait a minute. I thought I had a picture of it. Yeah, look at that. These are 124 anti-aircraft lights, and they were pointed up in the sky. That's that same place, and it looked like a cathedral of ice. I mean, it was just enormous. And they would sing, and they would have this. And Hitler, of course, was an enormously effective orator. He studied it. Goebbels, by the way, had a PhD, a doctorate in communications and how to manipulate masses. How do you communicate to mass audiences and move them? He got a doctorate in that. But it was like a worship service. That's really what it was. And it was moving to people, especially when they felt like they had been so crushed. They had such a remarkable culture, had contributed so much to the world, and then they had been completely humiliated by the world. And now, like a phoenix out of the ashes, they felt Germany was being up on her feet again, and Hitler was helping them to stand again. Yes, sir.
If you ever saw any of those rallies in movies or newsreels, it shows there's no individualism. I mean, everything's in lockstep. The parades, everything is the mass. And the ones that are candlelight at night or light, I don't know if candlelight or not, we just take your breath away. I mean, they will.
It would be hard not. Yes, it would be hard not to be moved. And then you have this, of course, you do have one individual coming from the people. Hitler would walk from up there, and he would walk down, one individual for the nation. So there was that, they would put it on him to be and he's going to be a master, again, at the photo op, of being a man of the people. I've got a lot of literature. You never see Hitler. The caricature we have is him just yelling. And, I've got just lots of pictures with him smiling and with lots with children and with dogs and with women and with all. And he's a likable. I've got pictures. I mean, we want to distance ourselves from him. In fact, if you've ever talked to Germans, I've talked, of course, of that generation. Many of them will have said there was something about his eyes. In other words, we were seduced. And of course, other people saw him and said, we didn't see anything about his eyes, but they felt mesmerized by it. And he did study. I mean, and I could tell you a lot more about that if you wanted to know. But he studied art, and he was a failed artist, and he really only cared. I mean, at the end of the day, people think this is what he cared most about. He wanted to build a new Berlin. And some of you know the story of Albert Speer, who is a young doctoral student in art, or he's got his doctorate and is an architect. And so he cared about aesthetics. And there's a wonderful book by Hitler and the Power of Aesthetics. And it really is a great book just to show, just because you love art doesn't mean you're not evil. Or you don't have evil intent, because what mattered to him was art. And he was prepared to sacrifice everything. And you know what? This is an interesting point. He would have artists. This is the most amazing thing. There would be artists in Germany who would betray him, who would say, Hitler would find out about it. And anybody else who would betray Hitler, you'd be dead. Okay, you'd be gone. But you know what? In many, many occasions, Hitler had said, well, he's just an artist. What does he know? He would let the artists, because for him, they were the spiritual people, the guides, whoever creates good art. And so he's obsessed with art. And, okay, there's the rallies. And of course, this whole idea of being Nazi religion, the Germanification of the faith, or just creating this new Gläubige, believers in God religion mixed with the symbols of the state. You've got all kinds of religious ceremonies in the churches. They would bring all this stuff in the churches. You would have Nazi weddings. You would have Nazi, let's see, that's Lord's Supper, weddings, baptisms. They were going to create it was a religion. Nazism was its own way of religion. And these are part of the symbols of that. All right. Let me get on with this. Okay. This is Paul Althaus. He was one of the great Lutheran scholars. He became sympathetic and a Nazi party member. There were theologians who should have known better, who were supporting this. Althaus, that is Emanuel Hirsch, a colleague of Karl Barth's. There was Kittel. These are Nazi members. And some of you, I see there's some pastors in this audience who those massive volumes by Kittel. You can find anti-Semitic stuff in there, and it came. There's also an effort to make Jesus into an Aryan, and unbelievable. You would think, as rigorous as German scholarship is, that this would not be possible. But perhaps because German scholarship is so rigorous, maybe they thought that maybe Jesus, who had some sort of ancestry in Persia, or maybe he really wasn't Jewish. But you've got a lot of blonde-haired. You got blonde Jesus is showing up. You can't see this. Maybe I know a church in Austria. This is on the mural of this church. You see the pews down here? You see the pews down here? Now there's Jesus right there. You see that? There's a guy sitting right there with a mustache about this wide, sitting right there, listening to Jesus. Oh, sorry.
We have the picture here too.
We got the picture here too. Okay. You got a picture here. Yes, sir.
Can you dive down a little bit into the theory of Arianism and where all that was dug up from?
The leaders of the confessing church recognized that they were dealing with the deeper problem was what they called natural theology.
Okay.
And it was something that had come into the Protestant church over 250 years prior. And it was wanting to say, we know that Jesus Christ, as he's attested for us in Holy Scripture, yes, we believe it, but we also want to believe in God revealing himself in nature, and that those become competing sources of revelation. That's the problem. That's the problem that the Barmen Declaration is dealing with. And that is, we're wanting to say, yeah, we know what the Bible says, but guess what? Look what nature is telling us. Nature is telling us that there are certain people that are built for certain things, like Plato. So it's natural theology is really the deeper issue.
Well, why Arian? What's the sociological, historical source of Arian?
Yeah.
Why that
Yeah.
name anyway? Why not white?
Yes. Well, there's a lot about where does the word Aryan come from in terms of, but it was the Nordic. They're wanting to say that there's something particularly. There could be other, ethnic groups that have made their contributions, and that they'll talk about that. Yes, but we have our own particular identity as a people, and it's in our blood, and we want to honor that and just say that we're not the only people. The other people have their gifts too. But guess what? We're the people who do music and art and literature and chemistry and physics and all these things, and we need to be able to continue to do that. And so it wasn't. They were not saying we need to exterminate everybody. No, not at all. We want to. We're doing this for the humanity. Was their argument? We just want to keep giving the world these great gifts. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering, you're using the church, and yet most of us know that Germany was sort of split in half, not only geographically, but religiously. So the rubric of the church, or are they something else?
No, no. I mean, I started with the Concordat of 1933 to this was the chess move to sort of take them off the playing field. They knew that they couldn't silence the Protestants, so they made a deal with the church to you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone, at least. And so they effectively bought their silence. Now, there's a lot of stuff going on within the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, 800 priests are going to be slaughtered in Poland alone. So it's not as if it's not at all as if the Roman Church just stayed quiet. But officially, the question is, why did they not come up with something like what the Protestants came up with the Barmen Declaration in 34 or 35 or 36 or 37? It did. The Pope only started to make some statements even in 38. I mean, that's a long. So it's not as if they're completely quiet, but publicly they were looking out after. They thought they could do more good, hiding Jews, doing what they could to preserve the institution. So, but they didn't make a public witness like the confessing church.
Did you maybe say the magic word? You said Pope, that the church was a highly organized and highly centralized monarchy, and has been operating that way since, 236 or thereabouts?
Yeah. He's trying to preserve the institution, and that's what popes do, and that's what's happening in a lot. That's what happens when you have a hierarchical church, is that you have.
Whereas the Reformed and Lutheran churches were far more, individual congregations.
Yes, but what was concerning to a lot of the Reformed and the Lutherans were there were a lot of pietists who were more nonconformist. They didn't believe in institutions. They were more like their own little groups, their Gemeinschaften, their little communities. They got pretty quiet too, and that's why Bonhoeffer says in his in The Cost of Discipleship, the flight to invisibility, betrays the cost of discipleship. That is, people don't want to be identified with a church because it costs too much. And so a lot of people just decided to stay at home and be pious at home. I got some, I deal with young people who don't know that they just don't know anything about this. You are, I think, old enough to know that this actually happened. But here's a picture. You had to have if you really wanted to be patriotic, you had to have a picture of Hitler in your home. And and if you didn't, what's the matter with you? You're not patriotic? Here's a little thing. Some of you may want to see some of these things. In terms of raising children and families, these are called Mutterkreuze. They are mother crosses. And they are 3 different levels, like the Olympics. There's a gold, there's a silver, and there's a bronze. And let me just read you what the citation. And if you had a certain number of children, the Bürgermeister, the mayor, would give you a Mutterkreuz, and they would wear this on their lapel, around their necks. And here's what it says: the Mother Cross. And by the way, if you may want to say something about this. If you had if you had less than 4 children, you were eligible for a bronze. If you had up to 6, you had up to the silver. You get the silver medal. But if you had over 7 children, you got the gold. And let me just and if a young person are on the street and you had your Mutterkreuz on, they had to salute you. How do you like that? How do you like that? Here's this. It says, here's what it says. On the occasion of the establishment, the Reichsminister of Health stated, German motherhood should be regarded as having the same place of honor as the soldier on the front, because the battle for life and limb is just the same as for the front soldier in the thunder of war. The Nazis saw the fertility of millions of women in the coming years as the most important chapter in the annals of the security of the German nation's future. You can look at this. I'm sorry.
If you only had 1 child or none at all, then you just didn't count.
That's right. The question was, you just didn't count. You weren't eligible for a bronze. Yeah, now you had a story. You want to?
Well, both of my grandmothers, of course, my mother's mom, had 4 kids. She got the bronze, but she rejected it. My dad's mom had 8 kids. She got the gold, and she kept it. I do not know whatever happened. It might be in somebody's yard, hidden. I don't know. But one story I wanted to share with you about my mother's mother. Of course, everybody had the Hitler picture in their house, and my mom always told us this story towards the end of the war. She knew the Allies were close. So one night she was upstairs and trying to sleep, and she heard this chopping sound downstairs, and she didn't know what was going on because a lot was going on all around them every day. So she called down and she said, "Mother, is everything okay? What is this sound that I'm hearing?" And my Oma, as we called her, my Oma called back up and she said, "I am fine. I am having the best time. I am chopping up Hitler's picture and I'm having a bonfire." So but she did that when the Allies were close, but she had a good time with that.
Other questions? And I'm sorry I've gone so fast, but I spent semesters talking about this kind of stuff, and I thought I'd get it out as quick. Other questions?
Could we surmise, had the confessing church started 5 years earlier, that things would have been different?
It's a miracle that the confessing church was able to form. It was an absolute miracle that it was able to do that. And the crisis was not there. People didn't see it in the Weimar Republic. It was a miracle that you could get the Lutherans and the Reformed together to make this confession of faith. That's the Barmen Declaration. It's the most important theological document of the 20th century.
So how did it get so bad that it got good?
The church isn't the church until its back's against the wall. You find out, what is it that you really stand for, and that's what happened. They found themselves, they could do nothing else but confess the faith, or else betray the faith. Yes.
Was the church more important in contemporary life in Germany those days than the church is important in American society today?
Let me be very frank with you about that. The question is, let me just, I want to do it succinctly. It's a great question.
Was the church in Germany, more important to society then than the church as a whole important not only in American society today? Could you have a Barmen Declaration? Would anybody care?
Okay, that's such a great question. Was the church more important? Well, in some ways it was more important to some people, but you had less church attendance probably. I mean, American church attendance is now plummeting as well in America. But in terms of if you see, it's a different understanding for them. I mean, they pay Kirchensteuer, church taxes. I mean, what it means to be German and to be a member of a church is you support the art, the architecture, the music. That's what it means to be a part of the church, is you support these beautiful things. And they have a much deeper, profound sense that to be a Christian is not the same thing as to be a Muslim. They know that there's a profound difference, and we have different values. And that's even today. You will go to people your age, if you ask them, is Allah, Yahweh pretty much the same thing? They say no. Much more so than most Americans would say that, because they know how close Islam was. Even Angela Merkel said, "We're not doing polygamy here in this country. She said, "We're a Christian nation. We're not doing that. We got certain values." So in certain ways, those values were there, but on terms of personal, it's a different matter. But let me just tell you the thing. We don't have pastors as well trained. We don't have theologians who are as tough-minded to be able to do what they did in 1930s in Germany. We're not as strong. The American church just simply isn't as strong as the church was in Germany at that time in terms of its theological leadership. We couldn't possibly do it right now. Not yet.
Why do you think that?
Theological education. We're not training people like we used to. You know, we don't have, the rigor is gone. And we need to get better trained ministers to be able to see these things when they come.
Back to the word.
Yep. Yeah, and that's our burden. That's part of what our ministry is. We want to get ministers trained well enough to be able to talk about these things, think about these things, but the kind of courage, and this is what we're doing. I mean, my wife's writing a book about women in the confessing church, and she's almost finished with. She's been working on it for about a decade, and you may want to ask her about that at some time. But I mean, what we are, you know, we get discouraged. I mean, look, my dad was a PCUSA minister. I mean, I grew up in Charlotte. He was a pastor in Charlotte. My brother's a pastor. We've seen the church go down. Almost 3/4 of its membership have been lost in my lifetime. This is not very nice. This is very discouraging. And so we get lots to be discouraged about. But, you know, when we look at what those pastors were and those families were doing in Germany, we just have they are so inspiring, because so many of them were not only just willing to sacrifice so much, but they were often such joyful Christians. And they did it. And, you know, these are bright people, very bright, sophisticated people, and yet they put it all on the line because their faith mattered to them. Yes, sir.
Would you say that those of us who think of themselves as confessing Christians, that maybe it's time to stand up and speak out, do something?
What's stopping you?
Good question.
Yeah. You want to ask? She's much more interesting. Do you want to ask her anything?
I'm glad she's with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, this is an exciting, you know, I'm going to give you a quote, and for those of you who might not be able to come tomorrow for some reason, I want you to know that I'm going to give you a quote by Einstein. And Einstein, I'll give you the quote tomorrow, but he said, I'll just paraphrase it. He said, he came to Princeton in 1935. He was deported. Well, he got out. And he said, you know, when I was a young man, he said, in Germany, I looked at the newspapers and the editorial writers who claimed to be such guardians of freedom. He said, in a number of weeks, they were silenced. He said, then I looked at the university, you know, they claimed to be such bastions of truth. He said, they were silenced. He said, only the church stood squarely across the path of Hitler's campaign. He said, I have to admit that what I once despised, I now praise unreservedly, because the church alone had the moral courage to stand for intellectual freedom, for moral and intellectual freedom. And he would come to Miller Chapel, about 100 yards from where next to Dr. Mackay's house, and he would come and sing the hymns in Miller Chapel at Princeton Seminary, where we went. And he said, I have an unpaid debt to the Christian church. You know, the church has done miserably in many ways. The church has been silent when it should have spoken. It's spoken when it should have been silent. It's done a lot. But, you know, when you compare that to the other institutions, you know, we have a lot to be grateful for these Christians who stood like they did in 1930s. Okay.
When you come tomorrow, you bring your blue book and you bring a pencil. And the question is, what would I have done? What would I have done? Tomorrow at 11, go in peace.